Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program is about to begin.
Ladies and gentlemen, our program is about to begin. Please silence your cell phones or place them on vibrate.
أيها السيدات والسادة، سيبدأ البرنامج بعد قليل، لذا نرجو منكم التكرم بالجلوس في مقاعدكم.
My name is Mashael AlShalan, and this is day 10 of WEP.
The good thing in this workshop is that a lot of people, they come, especially people who are not working with water, and they started exploring the water availability.
We're going to start off talking a little bit about how we've used machine learning or artificial intelligence to find those electrical codes in the brain and how that led us on an adventure.
Here to help share my journey and hope that people would benefit, can learn from my mistakes and learn from the things I learned along my journey.
If there was one word to describe it, what would you say?
Inspiring.
Yeah, I was very touched in a few moments during his talk. I even had a little tear.
To be honest, at each point of the story, I'm like, this is where this guy gives up. But he never did.
Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, because we have live audiences following from around the world. It is my pleasure to introduce this panel discussion today that we have on toward a sustainable and resilient future. That links very closely to the theme of the Winter Enrichment Program called Resilience, but we are introducing another concept, which is sustainability, and we're going to be diving into the link between resilience and sustainability. I think there's been already some discussion along the web on those two concepts and how they are linked together, but we will do that maybe in a more formal manner. My name is Carlos Duarte. I'm Professor of Marine Science at King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, KAUST, and it is my pleasure to introduce the panelists that will be joining me today on this exciting panel. So I would like to introduce first Her Royal Highness Princess Mashael AlShalan, who's joining remotely from Riyadh. And Princess Mashael holds a master's degree in International Affairs from Columbia University School of International Public Affairs. And she has been authoring papers on climate change and policy, and participated in multiple forums on sustainability and climate change from a multidimensional, including environment, social and economic perspectives. She's also been participating in negotiations and has gained a deep understanding of the nature, stumbling stones, and dynamics of climate and sustainability negotiations. From that background, Princess Mashael went on to be a founding partner of Aeon strategy. That is an interdisciplinary sustainable development advisory firm that focuses on environmental, economic, and social development. And alongside with that, as an advocate of sustainable and equitable development, Her Royal Highness Princess Mashael also co-founded Aeon Collective, that is a cross-disciplinary non-profit that produces, curates, and disseminates fact-based and culturally informed knowledge around sustainability in the kingdom. So we are fortunate that both Aeon Strategy and Aeon Collective are partners of KAUST and working closely with KAUST because, for instance, Her Royal Highness is one of the members of the advisory board for the KAUST Circular Carbon Initiative, and also then Aeon Strategy also supports the government and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in multiple international forums, including organizing events and providing content for the COPs, the climate negotiations, like, for instance, COP26 in Glasgow, where they organize a very exciting program. So the next speaker, and I will then perhaps introduce the panelists that are attending remotely, is Ali Russell. Ali Russell is the Chief Marketing Officer of Extreme E. Perhaps I will then, rather than try to explain what Extreme E is myself, I will maybe give the floor to Ali to explain what Extreme E is, and then I will continue with the introduction of Ali. So over to you, Ali.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carlos. Thank you again for inviting us to be part of this panel. Extreme E is a sport, first of all. It's a motor sport, but it's a sport with a difference. It's a sport with a purpose. And that purpose is using sport as the platform to communicate climate change. And we do that by racing in parts of the world that have been damaged by climate change, and to tell stories which cuts through to non-traditional communities. So what we see sport has the power to unite, to bring people together. If you look at the Olympic Games, you look at the Football World Cup, you look at Formula One, it brings people together. And what we want to do is to use that same power to shine a light on climate change and shine a light on what are some of the fight backs, the stories that we can tell. And we work very, very closely with the scientific committee that help us to communicate the science in a very digestible way, but also some of the solutions. And we incentivize our partners and our fans to get on board with us and tackle some of the issues. So we deal with desertification, deforestation, rising sea levels, melting glaciers, melting ice caps, and really it's a championship that's changing the sort of prism of entertainment and helping to link entertainment with purpose. And I'm super proud to be joining you today from London, and thanks for the opportunity again.
Thank you, Ali. In fact, there's also a strong partnership between Extreme E and KAUST, because I have been appointed to being a member of the scientific committee of Extreme E that guides the deployment of projects and also the strategies around climate action in Extreme E. And in fact, in 2 weeks' time, we were supposed also as a partnership with Aeon Collective as well, Aeon Collective, Extreme E, KAUST, the Royal College of Arts, and Columbia Climate School at New York, where we had been organizing a Sustainability Champion Academy that was supposed to take place on board Extreme E vessel Santa Elena, but due to the current COVID situation, then it wasn't wise to bring a group of about 50 or 60 students and instructors into the close proximity of a vessel. So unfortunately, we had to postpone the program, but we hope to be able to run that program on board Extreme E vessel and floating paddock Santa Elena in the near future. So Ali Russell switches between London and Edinburgh, where he's based. He's Scottish, and you can see that then you can understand his Scottish roots and background in what I'm going to say afterwards. But he has a background on branding and marketing, and he has worked for global firms in marketing like Coca-Cola and others before then focusing in sports. And in sports, he has been managing football teams and other teams. So one of them is the Glasgow Rangers. So that brings the ball close to Scotland, and also the COP26, where Ali and also Extreme E were quite active in providing content and being present in the climate summit in Glasgow. He also was the CEO of the Queen's Park Rangers, another football club, where he then met Alejandro Agag, that was the chairman of the team. That was a second division team of football in the UK that Alejandro and Ali working together, along with the players, I guess, brought it up to the Premier League. So from running in a green field, Ali moved into motorsports, and he is a co-founder with Alejandro of Formula E. Today we had Alejandro Agag, the founder and chairman of Extreme E, giving a talk about the electrifying motorsports, a keynote lecture between 12 and 1. That was actually quite exciting. And then Ali is also one major pillar of that strategy, both in Formula E as a co-founder and then in Extreme E as a chief marketing officer. So thank you, Ali, for being with us from London. And then we have two KAUST panelists, which is Dr. Ana Margarida Costa. Dr. Ana Margarida Costa is the head of sustainability at KAUST. And then in that role, she's responsible for leading the sustainability of our organization, not only as a research-intensive campus, but also as a community of about 7,000 to 8,000 people that live and work at KAUST. So in that role, she's designing and implementing a comprehensive sustainability vision and a strategic plan, and promoting sustainability across every aspect of KAUST operations, from community to university. She has over 20 years of experience in leading sustainability plans and developing sustainability plans, and that work is underpinned by her capacity as a researcher on atmospheric sciences. So she earned a master's degree on atmospheric pollution and also a PhD on environmental sciences from University of Aveiro in Portugal, where Ana Margarida comes from. So her field of expertise and research is air quality and air pollution, but in her role in KAUST sustainability strategy, then that takes her into addressing many other elements of sustainability, including social and economical aspect. And our last panelist is Professor Matt McCabe, who's the co-director of the Water Desalination and Reuse Center at KAUST, also a professor in the environment program of BESI. And also now, recently, Professor McCabe was appointed to lead the Climate and Livability Research Initiative at KAUST. So Matt's work focuses on providing inventories and budgets for water resources using remote sensing tools as a core of his research, also looking at agroecosystems at scale and looking at the development and use of resources by agroecosystems. And more recently, he's venturing now into mangroves and the marine ecosystem as well, using a combination of advanced remote sensing tools. So soon about to launch, if not launched already, the first KAUST satellite, Cube satellite that KAUST will be launching soon, that Professor McCabe has been leading that development of the last years, and also developing new technologies and AI, artificial intelligence to assess on the operations of humans at large scales and interactions with environments. So with this, I will take a seat and I will open the floor before I walk to my seat by asking perhaps first Your Royal Highness Mashael to maybe share with us some ideas on resilience. So resilience is the theme of WEP. It probably has been described many times, but there's still a confusion between resilience and resistance. So for instance, if you look at a tree under a gale of wind, a very large tree that is very strong may actually not bend with the wind, so it's very resistant to the wind, but eventually it will break. So it is resistant, but it's not resilient. So a resilient tree will be one that bends and actually adapts to the wind, and when the wind stops and relaxes, then the tree gains back their position. So real resilience is the capacity of any system, be a cell, an organism, an individual, a community, a society, an ecosystem, to be able to adapt to pressures and then bounce back once the pressures are removed. That is resilience, right? So we're going to be talking a lot about the capacity to bounce back and resist pressures, and the connections with sustainability are obvious. But I would like to know and share invite my co-panelists to share their thoughts as to what is the link between resilience, which is our theme, and sustainability. So I will give the floor first to Her Royal Highness Princess Mashael to share with us her thoughts. The floor is yours, Your Royal Highness.
Thank you very much, Professor Duarte, and thank you very much for the very kind words you've said in the beginning. We're quite keen on bringing a lot of these programs together and hopefully be resilient together to this change that's happening these days. When it comes to resiliency, the way that I usually tend to think about it is through two main lenses. One that looks at the risk and uncertainty, and the other, I think, is the opportunity, really. So you've given a very good example of nature. And I think we could draw upon a few more examples of where resilience in and of itself might not mean sustainability in the longer run. One quick example that comes to mind is that of bears. Because of pressures on both the environment and a changing climate, we saw that bears are giving up hunting for salmon and choosing to go down the path of maybe a more vegetarian diet with berries. The same when it comes to the trees. So when we look at that one tree, we don't see it very much being mobile, but in terms of a system, in terms of a forest, we're seeing forests shifting towards more temperate climate as the climate changes over time. So when we start ideating on sustainability, how do we solve for things that range from, some of the great work that you're doing, Professor Duarte, on anthropogenic cacophonies in the middle of a marine environment, to hopefully some of the questions that Professor McCabe and others are thinking about when it comes to shoring up our coasts to rising seas. How do we discern what's resilient, and how can we ensure that what's resilient is equally sustainable? So the simplest way that I can think of, perhaps, to bring to the audience is through walking through an example. I'm going to talk a bit about my second home. So we did mention that I did my master's in international affairs, and I did that for quite some time in New York. I've been a long-time resident of New York prior to my years pursuing my master's studies. And what ended up happening when I first arrived in New York in 2012 to pursue my master's studies particularly was Hurricane Sandy. Now, Hurricane Sandy was the first time as a frequent visitor to New York where I've noticed that the whole city was brought to a full standstill. Probably not since Hurricane Sandy have they seen that kind of a big shake until COVID hit in 2020. So what's unfortunate when it comes to perhaps dealing with some of these problems, I'm still talking about Hurricane Sandy, yes, it happened in 2012, but still we're seeing that some of the hardest hit neighborhoods, I'll give a quick example of the Lower East Side in Manhattan, even though they've taken part of very novel, applaudable federal competitions like Rebuild by Design, the fact that you bring in intellectual and brilliant architects, engineers, and equally take in the feedback and invite a creative process to come up with flood protecting proposals by collaborating with members of the affected communities. Coming up with that solution itself does not automatically mean that that perfect, quote unquote, sustainable solution will come to the application side. Reason being is reality. Maybe sometimes some of the entities that will be paying for them, some of those solutions might not want to impose whatever is being done. Some of the cool ideas, for example, that were come up with firms like Bjarke Ingels and others were essentially doing really expensive, but I think longer term, beautiful proposals of burying the highway. If you're familiar with New York at all, the East Side is known for this major ugly highway compared to what's happening on the western side of Manhattan. And so KAUST, maybe some technical issues have actually stopped the last mayor of New York from actually coming up or imposing or implementing the solution that was reached by that brilliant group of people. And what ended up happening right now is halfway through the implementation of a solution that would hold off Sandy-like storms, maybe up to 2050. But what will happen then? Instead of going down a solution that takes in a rising sea level, that integrates it into, let's say, the topography of that coast and into the park itself, we're starting to see an emerging buildup of a wall. Walls are not necessarily the best ways of hedging against these risks. And somewhere down the line, that wall will have to become higher and higher. So I'll leave maybe this initial question of thinking about resilience and sustainability is that when we do not deeply link resilience to sustainability and we ensure that our solutions that are being proposed have full buy-in, resilience, unfortunately, would become nothing but a fleeting opportunity. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Those were very wise words and a lot of food for thought in your comments. So now I would like to maybe give the floor to Ali Russell to reflect on how resilience is linked to sustainability. So how do you see those links established?
Well, thank you, Carlos. I mean, the first thing, I think, I looked up resilience and it's the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, it's toughness. And, our project in terms of Extreme E, we've started a brand new sport in the middle of a global pandemic that none of us have ever seen in our lifetimes. So that resilience, I think, is entwined within the staff here and what we do. But I think, going back further, the whole subject matter of climate change and sustainability, I think it is challenged by resilience. Resilience is in abundance, but we need to learn far more about it because it's nature's way of fighting back. And if we can learn the lessons from whether it's, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, it could be the shrubs, it could be the trees that are able to adapt and be resilient in environments which most species can't live. If we can learn from that, we can learn how these species are adapting or how the coral has adapted and is withstanding the rise of sea temperatures. I think we're in a situation where we can extend the thought, we can accelerate the sort of fight back and nature's fight back. So the one thing I've had the benefit of doing is we have a ship called the Saint Helena, which is effectively our mobile paddock, and that moves us from A to B as we go around the world in terms of this racing championship. In between races, the ship acts as I would say a mobile laboratory for scientists to do a variety of different science experiments. And the one thing that we're finding as we go around the world, so whether it's dealing with the fight back against sea level rise and planting mangroves on the coast of Africa, or whether it's the restoration and the reforestation of the Amazon jungle, we're seeing resilience in every single environment that we go to, that adaptability that species have. And it's probably the most important part of sustainability, because it's that balance and it's that greater understanding. And I agree with Your Royal Highness there that I don't think this area can be explored properly without due care and consideration of resilience.
Thank you, Ali. And now I would like to maybe give the floor to Ana Margarida Costa to hear her views on that link between resilience and sustainability.
Thank you, Carlos. Well, as has been said already, resilience is the ability to adapt to stressful situations. And I like to pick up a little bit of Princess Mashael mentioned also on the opportunity side, and bringing these challenges and look to these challenges and a way to improve ourselves. Looking to other examples, and we have some, we just had very recently this weekend, massive rains, and that sometimes it happens on desert environments, and we can think ourselves, how can we use this massive challenge that we need to adapt to and use it as an opportunity? This water is a valuable resource for this region. How can we adapt? How can we use this massive challenge on our profit? So this creates the ability of thinking of new solutions to invent ourselves. And this is an important part of being resilient, and combined, of course, to ability to move forward with the sustainability. So there are, I think, these two concepts. Sustainability is very holistic, combining the social, the environmental, the economic aspect. Bringing resilience to the equation is a complex, it's much needed, and so they are very much connected. I always want to also to mention that my role in bringing sustainability and others that work in the same field as mine is also very challenging, needs to constant adaptation, because what we would like to see as immediate response to being a more sustainable institution or a specific actions that we want to drive, sometimes we need to adapt and create not a direct path, but different ways of achieving the same goal. So it's part of also our current journey, because sustainability involves a deep challenge for institutions. So it's something that is, I would say, present in my day-to-day life, because we always need to adapt, and each institution is different from each other. So we have different challenges every day. So that's one of the points.
Thank you, Anna. And finally, Professor McCabe, your thoughts on this?
So there's been some wonderful answers already. I'm not sure what I'm going to add to this. It's interesting, when we talk about sustainability, a very general definition of that could be that we are able to meet our present needs without taking away the capacity of future generations to meet their needs. So we often talk about sustainable solutions, but it's not always that we talk about the resiliency of those solutions going forward into the future. And when you put that into the context of climate change, it becomes an imperative that we not only develop sustainable solutions, because if we had sustainable solutions already, we wouldn't be dealing with climate change, but that they're also resilient. Because the underlying reality of changing climate is that the system of today is not going to be the same of the system tomorrow or into the future. So any sustainable solution needs to be resilient to that change. And the idea of resiliency being a perturbation or experiencing a perturbation and returning back to its natural state, that may also need to be revised as well, because those initial conditions from which it's been perturbed from may not exist any longer. So as engineers, we often talk about the resiliency of systems. We design our infrastructure, our cities, not to last a year or two, but last 50 years, so 50 or 100 years. So oftentimes you're planning resilience into those, but they're not necessarily, or sustainability is not necessarily at the top of that agenda. So they're two quite different concepts, but they need to be two sides of the same coin. We need to be striving for achieving both of those. And I bring it back to one of the focus of my own areas of research is on water security. Now, if you're looking at water security from a global perspective, well, it's completely sustainable. The water cycle is just a continuous system. Continuity is at the heart of sustainability. But at local scales, you can have systems which are completely unsustainable in terms of their water security. We're living in the Middle East. It's very unsustainable in how we use our water resources. We have to augment those with an engineered solution through desalination. So in order to have a sustainable solution to water security, you have to account for the resiliency of those as well. And I think as we move forward into the future, this is an imperative that our engineering approaches, our scientific approaches, when we provide solutions to the many challenges that are ahead of us, not only address the sustainability of those, but consider and implement the resiliency going forward.
Thank you, Matt. So I think I hear a number of common thoughts, a shared understanding, first of all, of what resilience is and sustainability is, which I'm very glad that we are all in the same page, so we don't have to debate about semantics and concepts, but also the fundamental underpinnings of that. So adaptation has been brought forward by all of our panelists as a main underpinning of resilience and sustainability, which is the capacity to adapt to changing conditions. Then Matt has also raised the concept of continuity of processes, so you should be able to maintain that adaptation to be able to support processes that need continuity. But From an ecological perspective, I'm a marine ecologist. When we looked at resilience of biological systems and ecosystems, there is one more dimension to adaptation. That dimension is redundancy. So ecosystems achieve a resilient capacity and achieve also a capacity to be sustainable in terms of maintaining processes, that continuity that Matt was describing, which is maybe more a trait of sustainability than resilience, but the two are connected. So ecosystems achieve that through redundancy. So in any ecosystem, there are a number of species that perform similar roles. So if one species disappears or is challenged by a change in the environment or a predator or an invasive species or any other contingency, it is quickly replaced by others that are already present there, sometimes in the background, sometimes not very present and not very abundant, that will quickly replace that role and then maintain a continuity and therefore sustain the processes of the ecosystem. So that element of redundancy might be one key word I would like to add. As you were reflecting about adaptation, adaptation really looks at the individual or the population. But when you look across populations, different species, then redundancy might be an element of both resilience and therefore by maintaining continuity of process, therefore sustainability. So I'll give you one example, again, as Anna has done from KAUST. So on Friday we had a flooding, very unusual, but we had a flooding at KAUST, and then on the same day, not only we had flooding, but we had the disruption of the internet. So the internet was down. I immediately thought that, the flooding caused a problem with the internet. Then I learned, I might not get the details right, but I learned that the problem from the internet actually just happened to hit us at the same time of the flooding, but they were entirely unrelated. So the reason why we lost our connectivity, and actually 2 days ago we would have been unable to maintain this conversation with an online presence and even an online streaming of the event, is that apparently a vessel hit a cable, an underground, a submarine communication cable in Mumbai. So that cable in Mumbai impacted many thousands of kilometers away the connectivity at KAUST, and because we rely so much on the internet for all of our processes, then we actually found that our processes were discontinued. And it's taken maybe about 3 days to recover from those impacts, and in some ways we're not fully recovered yet. There's a single cable, so perhaps redundancy of communications will give us a resilience. So I think that element of adaptive capacity, redundancy, might be applied to ecosystems, but also useful to plan sustainability strategies and resilient strategies for businesses, sports, operations, communications, everything. So maybe there's one more parallel that can be drawn from nature. We've talked about extreme events, water cycles, trees, and so on, but maybe ecosystems and redundancy in ecosystems is maybe something we haven't reflected enough as to how that redundancy can be embedded in our own operations, in whatever sector we work on, to build resilience and therefore be able to sustain processes. There's been one more thought that has been shared by the panelists, which is, of course, you are adapting, but you're adapting to a shifting future. So the capacity to predict the future is also important to inform adaptation and allow us to buy time to prepare and adapt. So a predictive capacity and a horizon screening in terms of being able to anticipate change is important. And it's probably far more important now than it was in the past, because I would like to quote a French poet, Paul Valéry, when he said that the problem with our times is that the future is no longer what it used to be. So we are encountering ourselves in uncharted territory. We're entering climate regimes that have not been experienced before by the human race, and therefore the future is certainly not what it used to be. And that it brings forward a challenge of predictability, and therefore a challenge to be able to adapt to unknowns and unknown futures. So that's, again, one more trait. So I think that's been an enriching discussion, and a lot of keywords have been raised by the panelists that I think have applications and deep applications in our research, in our daily lives, in sustainability strategies of our organizations and even businesses, I would say. So I would like then to maybe go a bit more specific into the questions and the insights from the panelists. And I would like maybe to invite Ali Russell to reflect on, as he mentioned, Extreme E was launched and started the first season of racing just when the pandemic started. And so that required a lot of adapting capacity. We have not proven to be very good at predicting the future in the pandemic. We keep being surprised by COVID. But Extreme E also has a strong sustainability strategy and agenda. So it is designed to operate in a very sustainable way. And I'd like to ask Ali, in which way the strong focus on sustainability of Extreme E may have allowed it to adapt and cope and be resilient to the pandemic.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think you make some very good points there, Professor Duarte. The first thing to say is we talked a lot about the North Star of the championship being the environment, but we have what we call is the 4 E's. So we have E for the environment, we have E for electrification, and we talk about predicting the future. Our prediction is the future will be electric because it needs to be electric. Mobility accounts for around about 30% of global emissions. So it's incredibly important that we move to different structures of e-mobility. And those revolve around the electric motor. How that is whether it's lithium-ion batteries, whether it's hydrogen, it will be an electric motor. So our championship is predicting that the future will be electric. And we are at the forefront of allowing manufacturers to test their technology, their very latest technology, in some of the most extreme environments on this planet. So what that means is high altitude, heat, cold, variety of different surfaces, from ice to sand to dirt to you name it, we throw at these cars. And what we've had to do is we've had to build in redundancy to the championship because we are going into the middle of nowhere. So Greenland has never, ever had a major sporting event that's been held in Greenland because the population is very small and they're all based in these rural communities along the coastline of Greenland. And we felt that it was incredibly important for us to democratize sport, to bring sport to the locations where we can tell the appropriate stories. So we've designed a championship which creates sport without people. So our product has been agile and has been developed with the view of not having mass fans that are coming to these in some places fragile communities that can't have 10-15,000 people. So we reduced the number of staff in the teams, we reduced the number of TV people, we do a lot of remote production, and we have the smallest number of people that we can to run a major sporting event. And then what we do is we use digital technology to transmit that back to London, where we cut together the TV pictures and send it out to the rest of the world. So no matter where you are in the world, I think it's 198 countries we broadcast to, you can watch Extreme E on your laptop, on your tablets, on your television, or on your mobile phone. So we've reimagined how a future could look for sustainable sports. You then get into the fact that we try to be as I suppose as sustainable as we can on site. So what that means in real terms is we use hydrogen fuel cell. So we take green hydrogen around the world and we use that to charge the batteries in our cars. So it's zero emissions racing. And what that allows us to do is to be a very, very strong message. You know, if we can do it and we can do it in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of Greenland, then it can be done in the middle of New York, it can be done in the middle of Hong Kong, Tokyo, you name it. And I think that's a really important point here, is that we are reimagining how sport can be run and allowing people to understand that electrification and electric cars are cool, they're sexy, they're fast, they've got major agility. They're not necessarily like people's perception of electric vehicle, which is a Leaf, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to Leafs, but what we're looking to do is to make electric vehicles cool. And if we can break down that barrier and we can have really positive role models in terms of Formula One world champions like Lewis Hamilton, Jenson Button, Nico Rosberg, multiple Dakar winners like Carlos Sainz, W Series winners like Jamie Chadwick, Sebastian Loeb, who's won the World Rally Championship, 9 times. If we can have them endorsing this technology, it breaks down the barriers to people making those steps, making those strides forward. And I didn't finish off our pillars in terms of the ease. One of the other one which we've developed is that each team has 2 drivers. So they do 1 lap each. And the main rule is one must be a man and one must be a woman. So we have absolute equality here in the racing format. And that, I think, is hugely important in terms of building from within, showing what we can do. And I think motorsport lends itself to parity between men and women. There's absolutely no reason that there isn't, that Verstappen isn't a female, or Lewis Hamilton isn't a female. There can be a Formula One world champion. But what females need is they need more opportunities, and they need more inspiration to get involved in sport at an earlier age, to work hard like the men do at the moment, and to get to the pinnacle and to be that role model to the next generation of girls. So we have a social aspiration around equality, around diversity. We have a sustainable innovation role in terms of what we do in terms of the technology that's going into mobility and electrification. And I think we have that added aspect of running these events at as small carbon footprint as can be imagined. So that's reducing the number of people on site. That's our choice of power. It's how we move around the world. Instead of flying the cars from the Amazon to Greenland, we use a ship, because yes, it has a carbon footprint, but it's much, much lower. And so what we've done is we've tried to create a sport that is resilient to the future. And the byproduct of it is it's a business. So we want to ultimately make money, but we want to make money in the right way, doing the right thing, and helping to accelerate these changes that need to be made. So I hope that's given a slight insight, and I know it's very different to my colleagues on the panel, but it just gives you an idea of how sport can be reimagined, and that mindset can be taken into so many other areas of business or conservation.
Thank you very much, Ali. In fact, very good thoughts for us to reflect on, and adding diversity to the panel, which is important. We are a little redundant on the science side, but then you add diversity as well to our thinking process. In fact, also, Your Royal Highness, you have been reflecting a lot on something that we don't do that much as scientists in the panel, which is the role of culture. So you have been emphasizing in Aeon Collective and Aeon Strategy on the important cultural roots of sustainability and resilience. And I would like to ask you how you see that those cultural roots can lead us into a resilient and sustainable future from a Saudi perspective.
Thank you very much for the question, Professor Duarte. So while I'm not a scientist, I like to wear that hat of a fake scientist. So maybe I'll start from a conceptual point. The concept of nature itself, we tend to talk a lot about nature and sustaining nature and saving nature. forgetting that nature in and of itself as a word is tangled up in culture. So until there was something that we could contrast nature to, or the natural, like technology, agriculture, the arts, all we knew as species was nature. Before humans started settling, and whatever emerged from that settlements and grounding is the first semblances and the first strokes of what culture came. So culture was born over thousands of years of humans attempting to bring order to what is wild. Some taking approaches that are a bit more heavy-handed than others. I can't help but reflect on that point that you made, Professor, on redundancy from nature. We are seeing sometimes, and when we're doing that attempt of replication of what's natural, of that nice point that's the intersection of nature and culture, and build up redundancy in the process, we have more resilient crops. So in crops that we've chosen, like bananas or corn, for example, where we've gone down the path of choosing one strain as the strain that will conquer all, we're starting to see emergences of risks and potentially the loss of the ability to produce those crops just because of the sheer lack of redundancy. So let me go back to the word culture. The way that we see it at Aeon Strategy and Collective is both a source of inspiration when we're trying to seek solutions, as well as a really strong tool for policy implementation and the acceleration of sustainable, impactful, resilient solutions at scale, at the point that really matters. So I'll give two ways or key examples, perhaps, that would better frame it. Societies over time were seen to be a lot more resilient when they were prioritizing collective benefit to that of the individual. We've seen that globally when it comes to the terrace plantations, particularly when it came to efficient use of water. So you pointed to that, Professor McCabe, a bit earlier, that we cannot sustain agriculture the way that we do in a place like the kingdom, but there are equally issues of food security that one must consider. So how did our ancestors used to tackle this? And this is replicated globally. It's these terrace plantations where they were seeing water as a public good and rationing the use for the different families that are going through the sides of these mountains. So it was not a focus on the I, but more on the we as a collective. The second side that I was equally pointing to was, how can we use it as an accelerator for the implementation of these policy solutions? I'll draw maybe a bit to the initial example that I gave of the Lower East Side. So when we were thinking of what was successful in the initial solution is that it had buy-in. So the fact that it had buy-in not only from the designers, not only from the technical people, but equally from the communities that were within that geography, what emerged was a solution that was already adaptable and seen as resilient by design, because everyone was seeing themselves reflected in that project. The moment that that was implemented or imposed in a way that was maybe favoring these higher walls, it became more of a divisive issue in the community itself, where people who were actually vulnerable in the Lower East Side, at lower lying parts of that neighborhood, all of a sudden became, because they want to survive really at the end of the day, proponents of that solution, even though in that choice, they were bypassing this longer term actual resilience. So these are all very complex things, and I think that tying things to culture would actually give us such strong insight, but equally a way of navigating around the actual adaptation and implementation of such solutions.
Thank you, Your Royal Highness. I think that's a very important reflection, and indeed, as you emphasize, culture is built over thousands of years, and therefore it has inherent continuity, and it is when we break that continuity that we might actually challenge resilience, and we might break resilience and therefore impact on sustainability. And an example might be the fires in Australia. So there's been wildfires aggravated with climate change in the past years in Australia, which have devastated the eastern side of the country. And now Australian government is recruiting from Aborigines, the tribes and nations, people who still have that culture of how to manage fire to be able to avoid fuel that is in the, remove fuel that is in the ground without creating impacts, and then avoiding wildfires to eventually create even further problems. So, in fact, it wasn't technology, it's actually knowledge that has 35,000 years of history and is embedded in Aboriginal people. So it's that element of continuity, looking back, there's culture, and as Ali mentioned, then there's also an element of opportunity, looking at the future with opportunity, and also communicating possible futures in an engaging way. So I'd like to now turn to Professor Matt McCabe, who's leading the climate livability research initiative at KAUST, and then ask to what extent in your design of the program, then resilience can be operationalized. How you design for resilience?
Right, it's a great question, and it's a very important one because it's resilience is really at the heart of what we hope to achieve with the Climate and Livability Initiative. This is a new initiative that KAUST has launched. It's only several months old, and it's built around several themes that we believe have significant relevance and great potential for impact in the kingdom. We have efforts on regional local scale modelling. We have studies on climate impacts, adaptations and mitigations. But the two ones that I see are very relevant in terms of understanding the impacts of resilience relate to ecosystem restoration and enhancement and sustainable and resilient urban systems. So resilience is an element there that has to play a central role in any solutions that we propose or seek to apply in the kingdom. The initiative is going to be very much focused on that solutions aspect. In evaluating the various approaches that we have to combating the challenges of climate change into the future, we need to be proposing solutions that can, as I intimated before, successfully navigate the changing landscape and the changing conditions that the future is going to present. And you cannot do that without resilience. Now, from an engineering perspective, we often think about resilience, but not necessarily sustainability. And I think from a natural perspective, a natural systems perspective, they're almost inherently sustainable, but not always resilient. We really have to bridge that gap. In the design of natural systems, which is the idea behind ecosystem restoration enhancement, we need to be thinking about, are the solutions that we provide suitable for the local environment that we're proposing them for and sustainable? And you can change sustainable to the derivative, self-sustaining. They can't be requiring external input in order to survive. These systems have to be able to adapt to changing conditions, but also support themselves without interference or added energy inputs going forward. So the assessment of solutions, the assessment of approaches that are going to be implemented over the coming years and decades, resilience is absolutely central to it.
Thank you, Professor McCabe. So we have now entered in theorizing about resilience and looking at science from a cultural perspective, from a scientific perspective and climate, but then there's one element of very tangible design for sustainability and resilience that we've heard from Ali Russell in terms of how to drive a sports to success in the middle of a groundbreaking sports, very different sports with a purpose, to success in the middle of a pandemic. And then we have also with us Anna Margarida Costa, who's actually dealing with a very tangible challenge, which is how to drive a community like KAUST to be sustainable. So what role do you think that the resilience plays, and what are the biggest challenges that you assess that we need to face?
Thank you. Well, first of all, we are definitely a community. We are, besides the university campus, we are a city. Sustainability, as we are addressing and internationally being addressed in higher education, addresses the education aspect and the research aspect, which is the core function of a university. And this is, I would say, one of the key elements for us in terms of sustainability. So one of the aspects is actually how the students there at KAUST learn about driving solutions, sustainable solutions and resilience. So this is one of the key elements, that the programs that are designed and currently being designed to address these areas. So we are hoping that the students that are at KAUST are able to come out to, after they finished their graduation, to ability to address these challenges and to bring the resilience aspect to their future activity. So the research component, as we already just with Professor McCabe, is being part of many research programs. We are mainly, sustainability is one area that is, I would say, a common aspect for all our research at KAUST. So this brings us also to the innovation aspect and the ability of create innovative solutions to address these challenges and to help to drive resilience. Could be in urban areas, could be in the natural world. And our campus allow us to have a unique experience as a living lab. So we are able to test and deploy solutions and actually try to understand if they work or not. So helping to build on this resilience path. Another important aspect in terms of our campus is how we are driving or challenging our own carbon footprint. And this is a big aspect. So as we mentioned before, Professor Duarte mentioned before, trying to understand what are our current impacts and assess these impacts and how to address them. So besides the mitigation aspect, the adaptation aspect, and a question of how we are adapting our own campus to a future climate is a very important one. It's a big discussion that we are hopefully having this year, and create our own adaptation plan. In question of increasing of temperatures and how the AC, the cooling needs and the AC consumptions are going to affect our future carbon emissions, the increase of sea temperature and how this will affect our own water production because we have a desalination plant. How we are going to adapt in situations that we had this weekend. We had a flood and we had some impacts. What are the future scenarios? And we need to be ready for that. So there are plenty of questions in terms of master planning for KAUST, and also indication aspect of our own community. So we need to make sure that every one of the 7,000 people, not only the students, faculty, staff, all the community members understand the importance of sustainability and also the resilience of need of bringing resilience to the system. So this is our mainly a big task that we have ahead of us, and we hopefully have everyone on board to drive this big challenge.
Thank you, Ana Margarida. So I think that we are an institution that is generating knowledge in science and technology that we share to the world, with the world to drive sustainability and resilient policies to climate and other challenges. But then our own behavior is a proof of concept of what we share with the world. So can we be a resilient community and resilient institution, a sustainable institution, and if not, is really the knowledge we generate that much useful if we cannot apply it ourselves. So an interesting challenge for us. And I've been so interested in the remarks and thoughts of my panelists that I have kind of lost track of time. So I apologize for mismanagement time, which means that we only have time for one question before I have to close the panel. And I received an interesting question from the live audience. There's a system that we receive all the questions and are voted upon. So one question that I felt was quite interesting and a challenge for you to respond is that at KAUST we are rooted in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and in fact much of our demographic is Saudi, but we are a multicultural community with about, I believe, 118 nationalities on campus. So when we are to choose a particular cultural background to drive a sustainability or resilient strategy, we can choose from China, Australia, Portugal, Spain. We can choose from many. So is there a way to maybe have a resilient or sustainability strategy that is cultural agnostic, like for our own community, or we absolutely need to somehow embed those strategies in one cultural framework? Maybe Your Royal Highness, Mashael, I don't know. Yeah, just step in and take the floor.
I'll take it maybe from a human perspective, since my interactions with KAUST are always inspiring, but I think that sometimes we focus too much on our differences instead of our commonalities. It's no coincidence that we see certain solutions or certain things that we think are tied to one specific culture be replicated all over the globe, really. It's just that we never had the time to actually listen and tune in to what the higher purpose of said cultural norms are. And the more that we are cognizant of those commonalities and integrated into our processes, the better the solutions will be. Because in Arabic we say يد واحدة ما تصفق, you cannot clap with one hand. So the more that we could collaborate and work together on a global level, cognizant more of our similarities and actually celebrating the areas in which we have slight differences in some ways, the better solutions we'll come up with and the more rigor that we can bring into our process.
Thank you. So maybe Ali, Extreme is racing, or in the first season, it raced first in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and interacted with communities in Alula, and including some of the challenges that they have on the certification that were addressed by the legacy program. Then next you raced in Senegal, and there was very close interaction with communities in Senegal, also coping with changes and issues of lack of resources, and then deploying projects there with them. Then Greenland, with a very, very different cultural setting, learning from Inuit, and they do know something about resilience to be able to make it in that environment. And lastly, Italy, Mediterranean community, and then the UK. So you have been interacting with communities with very different cultural backgrounds, very different takes on how to be resilient and sustainable. Is there a commonality that you can extract, or other lessons that you have maybe experienced in one of other cultures that can be translated or transferred to another setting, or are they just context specific?
You know, the simple answer for that, and the context is very good. We do work with a huge number of communities in the locations that we race. But I think it was most stark in Greenland, where that's a community that actually their connectivity is linked to climate. So when there's ice and when it's cold, they're able to go to other villages, visit relatives. Due to climate change, the ice doesn't, cover Greenland for 9 months a year. It only comes in for about 6 months a year. And so you have these communities that then are like islands. They're not connected. They have the same challenges that island communities have throughout the world. And they're battling with depression. They're battling with a lot of social aspects because of this fact that they're now far more isolated. So the one thing I think that is consistent across all the communities is the fact that you have to be resilient, you have to adapt, and if you don't, it's quite stark in that, communities die, people die, species die. So the name of the game is to be adaptable, and I'm sorry to be quite stark on that, but there's some wonderful stories of how communities have adapted and what they've done. You mentioned Senegal, and you mentioned the fact that the communities there take something like ocean plastic, which is rubbish, and they use it as building materials, and they build walls and public facilities, and there's a project called Eco Bricks. So I think that there's without doubt hope, but there has to be adaptability, otherwise the future is quite stark.
Yeah, so then I would like to maybe close the panel because we are 2 minutes over time, maybe with that last word of hope. So hope is always, a hopeful look at the future is always a an underpinning of resilience. So we are looking hopefully at 2022. We're looking at seeing the end of the pandemic. We're looking at successful programs at KAUST, both in terms of our community and also our research to contribute to improved climate livability and sustainability globally. We're looking at supporting global negotiations through Aeon Collective at the end of the year in Egypt, in our region, to bring the world to a resilient future. And then we are also looking at a successful second season for Extreme. So thank you all for joining us. And I would like to request a round of applause for the panelists, both remote and on the stage. Thank you very much.